What's up, guys? We are in the Troponin episode. It's episode 9. I'm sitting here chuckling because we make a lot of as that she said jokes off air. One of us is actually a 14-year-old boy. But the three of us were kind of talking this week a little about what we might call crayon eater moments, meaning maybe not our brightest moments. I'm not talking like the normal crayons. I'm talking like you eat like the crayons you get at a restaurant that aren't even like real crayons. Dave, do you want to kick us off with?
You're gonna trigger somebody who actually has pica.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think those actually have a higher wax content. I think the ones at restaurants, they're cheap.
Jesus.
So, yeah, one moment that comes to mind with me is, I've always been kind of extreme. So if I get like, let's say, a supplement that's supposed to do something good, I'm like, well, if a little bit is good, then the whole bottle is better. So this was back this is like 10 years ago now. So there's a supplement called alpha lipoic acid, or there's also the R version, R alpha lipoic acid. But basically, you could say it's good for insulin sensitivity, but I guess it's also kind of an insulin mimetic. And what I mean by that is that it will lower your blood sugar. And berberines become even more popular than the ALA now, probably for good reason. And like this, our supplement, first attachment suppressor, has both of these things in it, berberine and alpha lipoic acid. But basically, way back when I was doing this like cyclical keto diet, which is probably another crayon eater moment in and of itself. But on the So it was cyclical because it's still like once a week you'd have this huge high carb. Basically, the whole day was an enormous high carb day, even higher than the high days that we do on Justin's diets now. And you'd have some cheat foods in there as well. And ALA is one of those supplements that people would advocate for to kind of help you shuttle everything to the right places and basically make it more of a day for glycogen storage and amino acid storage in muscles versus just building a bunch of fat tissue with all that food that you're eating. And I got this bottle of ALA, and so you take like 1 or 2 caps, and you don't really feel it, but you just know that it works. And so I think I ended up taking the better part of a bottle, like a little bottle from like that Now Foods or whatever generic supplement brand it was from. And this was at the end of an evening, and I was eating with my family, and at some point I got like really, really hypo. Like I started sweating and getting all clammy, like classic hypo symptoms. And at first it was okay, and like I didn't want to explain the situation to my family. So like, oh, are you okay? I was like, yeah, I could use some juice. So they gave me like a glass of orange juice, and like I ate some chips, and we were already eating a meal with the family anyway. So I ate and I continued as usual. And then I got home later that evening, and I kept eating because it was the high day. So of course I'm going to keep eating stuff. And I took a whole bunch more ALA.
Oh, God.
And the amount of ALA, it was a little bit. Well, I've never done this, but I imagine it was a little bit like taking way too much insulin for the food that you're eating. But it didn't kill me. It just made me go as hypo as I've ever been in my life. And it's kind of annoying because you go hypo, your body needs food, but it also makes you extremely nauseous and you want to puke. And so basically I puked up everything, just everything I had in my stomach. It was disgusting.
But wasn't this when you were also like on your roommate was on an interview?
No, you keep conflating stories. That was just a food poisoning thing.
Oh, right. So Dave also is like, if you've seen Dave train, everything he does is like intense. Everything Dave does in life.
Yeah, my
intense.
vomiting is intense.
When Dave pukes, I mean, it's not just like it's extra.
Yeah.
And this is when you were living
with Fritz.
At the time, he was also living with a quadriplegic.
Yeah, that's another whole nother story. But yeah, I was living with a quadriplegic guy. An arrangement I found on Craigslist, which turned out to be awesome. But basically, I threw up in like the bathroom, my bathroom, and then I went upstairs to try to get some more food to remedy the situation, and I couldn't even hold it once I got upstairs, so I ended up puking in this guy's office, and I had to clean that up, and yeah.
This guy was like a big-time lawyer, right?
Yeah, he was a lawyer, an investment banker, and yeah. So don't do that.
Justin, do you got anything?
I just had one the other day actually. We're working on new flavors for intra-workout and pre-workout for first attachment, and we got a new sample in for the pre-workout, and we've had a bunch of flavors. We're trying things out, and they usually come in these little tubes, almost like test tubes,
Yeah.
like a serving port. And so I get these 2 tubs, and they're not in test tubes; they're in like cups, 8-ounce cup sizes. They're still like Well, there's a label on it. I didn't read it. I just like I did. It was like the raspberry lemonade new flavor or something, and so I was like, oh, I'll try that. Pour it in a cup, stir it up. It's like really like thick, you know. So I drink like half of it, and then I fill the cup back up with water, and my face starts like melting off, and I'm like, oh god, there's too much niacin in this. This is terrible, you know. And so I'm like, so I didn't finish it, and I go and start to work out, and my heart is racing. I'm like, they did not get the right ingredients in this, and so I called Jeff, and I was like, that's not they don't have the right ingredients. He's like, no, yeah, they don't. They messed up. There's not the right amount of L-citrulline in that. I was like, no, what they do? We put 10 grams of niacin in it? He's like, no, niacin's right. They just messed up the citrulline. We got more samples coming, so sorry about that. And then I was like, God, it's so effing strong. I think my heart is gonna explode. He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, it was so strong. He's like, well, no, it's the same amount. And I was like, we realized that I took off. There was 5 servings in there.
Oh,
So
jeez.
yeah,
Wait, this is 5 servings
so
of WTF.
oh yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Holy
well, so
cow.
you took a gram and a half of caffeine all at once.
I probably had about half of it. Thank
No,
God.
But
Thank God I didn't chug it. Thank God. Yeah, I put about 2.5 servings, I guess, which wasn't crazy, but it was not like I wasn't expecting. You know, I've taken pre-workout forever. I mean, I've been back when ephedrine was legal. You know, so I haven't. It, I thought I was immune to caffeine, but yeah, it was mostly the niacin. And but that was a Korean eating
Yeah,
moment.
that's a cranial moment for sure. I used to avoid salt. I thought salt was really, really bad. Someone I was working with at the time was like, no, don't. If you have salt, you're going to bloat. So I used that light salt potassium substitute on everything. Like every meal.
well, at least has some sodium.
Yeah, but it's like not good.
Yeah.
And at the time I was training for an endurance event in addition to powerlifting and bodybuilding. So you like really need salt just for like muscle conduction and whatnot. I mean, I would
Yeah.
have been smarter, but being a younger female in the industry, I was like, I'm gonna do whatever my coach tells me to do. I'm gonna be super compliant. Whatever he tells me to do, I'm gonna do. That wasn't very wise.
You didn't start eating salt until like
Yeah,
we
until
met.
yeah.
Yeah, I think I watched you.
Oh my
We were
God.
like FaceTiming or something over webcam, and I was watching you make your egg whites. I was like, "You gonna put salt in that?" Like, no, I don't eat salt.
That's so gross. How do you even? I don't. Half the foods I only like because they hold salt really well.
I was so scared of feeling big. Like I was terrified. At this time, I think I was like 110, 112 pounds. My peak off-season weight last off-season for anyone was probably about 150. Um, so I mean that's a big weight difference. I was tiny, and so any little bit of water, I was like, oh my god, I'm dying. I have the fat. I also grew up in a very
Fat phobic household.
yeah, yeah, which is another component.
Yeah.
But yeah,
What's
cranial
funny
moments.
though is that you could have doubled your salt intake, and within like 2 or 3 days, you'd level out anyway.
I know, and there's always this weird phenomenon too, where like logically you can know something, you can have the academic science to back it, and because that's what my degree's in. But for some reason, I was still like emotionally terrified to cross over that bridge. So it's just really, really interesting to think about like the academic knowledge of what we know about physiology, and also having this like weird emotional response. Good.
Salt's a tricky one. And the one of the hardest things as a coach is figuring out how to properly word things because if there's one thing a client will do, it's misinterpret what you tell them to do, especially the final week. I had one client. Well, this client had. Uh, he's a great guy. I hope he doesn't listen because he probably know who this is. He started using kratom, and I think he got a major kratom problem and was having absolutely terrible anxiety and wouldn't stop taking the kratom. But he was the same thing. He was like not eating salt, and I was like, I told him like we have to. We're not going to be able to dry out properly. And so somehow between, I want your sodium, we're not cutting sodium, keep sodium consistent across each meal and across each day. He read that as eat as much sodium as you can humanly ingest without
Oh,
dying, or maybe not even that, without vomiting back up. So he sends us, and he does this like several days out of a show after not eating
oh
sodium.
my god.
And and he put on like 26 pounds when we weren't even carbing up yet. And he sends these pics, and I'm like, what's going on? He's like, well, he's like, yeah, I got 26 grams of sodium down. I've been, I'm just, I hate it, because I haven't been eating. So it's really hard to get down. So mostly what I've been doing is just pouring as much as I can fit in my hand and just choking it
Oh
down.
my gosh.
And I'm like, what do you mean? Where did you? He said, yeah, we're sodium loading. I'm like, there is not in a single word anywhere have I said sodium loading. He's like, well, you just said, you wanted sodium consistent. We said we weren't cutting it. I'm like, yeah,
That doesn't
not
make
cutting
sense.
it is those are different sentences. And so that's always my biggest fear with stuff in the peak week, because no matter how, 20 years of doing this, no matter how many times you've done it, how many times you word it, some of my things are very precisely worded, and I copy and paste them, and you might even notice it seems like, wow, that's really overly explaining something that you don't need to, because it's been refined over the years. So like, because what I would say is, we're not cutting sodium. Just keep your sodium normal. You can't say that, because people won't go wrong with that. So then you'll say, we are not changing sodium. Whatever sodium you have been eating, we will continue eating the same amount of sodium. So if you had been historically putting this much sodium on meal one, you will still put that exact same amount of sodium on meal one. And then in parentheses, not any additional sodium or not any less sodium, the same amount of, and still people it's mind boggling what people would misinterpret. But that was a big one. We ended up, because then we had to go. He ended up winning a show, but we had to talk about a roller coaster. Well, he went from no sodium or very low sodium, which I never told him, and I don't. He just decided that's another thing people do, is they decide they think I'm not telling them that for some reason, but they decide that they need to go low sodium because they heard that somewhere, even though I never said that and they never told me. But but anyways, went from that to gaining like 26 pounds without carving up. So then what we had to do is we had to cut sodium again the day before the show. So I had to have him cut sodium, and not only that, I was having him rinse his chicken off before and after he cooked it. And so like after you cook it, no salt, nothing, and then run it underwater each bite. He ended up, so he was gain 26 pounds, lose 26 pounds, while carving up, while it was just like such
His
a
work
while he's, oh man, and this is all going on while he's having extreme panic attacks because he's megadosing kratom
Oh my
and
God.
won't stop taking it, because the anxiety has him afraid of how anxious he'll be if he stops taking the kratom that's causing the anxiety.
What was his post-show rebound like?
Yeah.
If he already had that big swing 2 or 3 days before the show.
Oh, I am sure. He was a contest client only, and so we talked how we did after the show. We talked the day after. I told him how he should rebound out of the show. Told him what's going to happen. He contacted me like a while later, and I think I hope there's no way of anyone knowing who he was. He's a really good guy. He was really, like, other than this, really good guy. Most times people who do stuff like that, like have go to extreme things like that, they tend to be good people. Like a lot of, like, Robin Williams committed suicide. A lot of really, brilliant and funny people are depressed. They're self-loathing or self-deprecating. And a lot of really kind people are kind to other people, and they're terrible and hard on themselves. They treat themselves just terribly. But he contacted me a while later, and he had a rough go after, and I think he was even hospitalized, or like
Oh
went
my
to like
God.
a clinic, a rehab clinic or something for the kratom. He got out, but yeah, it was a wild ride, because you get those, you do, like, because the way I do it is, you do your last picks. We do picks every week, and then you do picks 6 days out and 5 days out. And then, we've talked about this, because I'll have you carb up. Typically, the carb up ends 2 days before the show, so that would be like 6 days out, and then we dry out 5 days out. So when I do 6 days and 5 days out with a high day at 7 days out, I basically see how you look the day after the high day, and then 2 days after, which would be like show day. So I can see like how you would look with a carb up if we didn't do any water cutting, and it helps me know how to dry you out. But then you see them again. That's Sunday, Monday, and then you're checking in again Wednesday. So there's only one day in
Yeah.
between. It's pretty benign, pretty safe. So usually people look exactly like you expect to. When he does those Wednesday check-ins, and he is just, we've done low carb, and he's up 26 pounds. I don't even think he drank 26 pounds of water. I mean, 2 gallons of water is like 16 pounds of water. So he pretty much didn't pee for 2 days.
Oh my God. Actually, now that we're on the topic of post show rebound, I have a question. Um, Both after Universe and after Tampa and Chicago this year, I've had like really weird like muscle cramping, like talking middle of the night, like super super bad Charlie horses that it feels like my adductors are gonna like tear off my bones again. Is that something that's more related to some of the water fluctuations from? I mean, I took what we did with
Yeah.
Diurex was very very mild. I want everyone to know that as a female competitor, I cannot recommend Justin highly enough, especially talking to other females backstage. Like I it's so nice to be in the hands of someone who's competent and keeps your safety first. But we did everything pretty mild, and I don't know if it's because there were two peaks, so there were two kind of water manipulation weeks. But like all week last week, I really wanted to deadlift, and I was like, I'm scared to because every time I go to brace, my like deep hip flexors, my abs cramp, everything is just like
Well, it's because it's, yeah. I mean, it's, well, you're still getting dehydrated, and so your electrolytes still aren't going to be perfect. You're changing your water balance quite a bit, and the electrolytes are really a percentage, a proportion of. I mean, they're really an exact number. Like no, what is it, nanograms
right.
per? I can't remember if it's deciliter for those or milliliter, whatever. But when your water level's going up and down, even if we keep sodium consistent, your water level's changing, so much. But there's so much more involved because, like the name troponin, calcium goes into a cell, binds to troponin. So calcium is really the initial driver of a muscular contraction. And then potassium plays a role, magnesium plays a role. I mean, electrolyte is really just anything with a positive or negative
Sure.
charge. So quick chemistry things, I guess. Yeah, I mean that's like electrolyte chloride, Na plus, Cl negative, and that's why table salt is Na plus Cl negative. And all a salt is, and that's kind of a confusing thing too, is because salts are really like electrolytes because what a salt is when a positively charged ion combines with a negatively charged ion, and they cancel each other out. That's a salt. So like if you take like ADHD medication, amphetamine salts, that's what they are. And so the salt just, and then the salt structures form like crystal, like square crystal structures. They're really nice, stable, because you have positive, negative. They form, now it's a
Sure,
neutral
there's
particle, and they're really
neutralization.
stable. And yeah, and then they break apart in the body, and then they're the ions again. And those things are needed because muscular contractions are really electrical signals. I think we talked. Did we talk about this? It's actually really interesting. It's a total sidetrack if anyone wants to see it. How it all works. So you have like a nerve, and the electrical signal travels along the nerve, but it actually doesn't travel along the nerve. There's fatty sheaths called myelin sheaths, and it's almost like if you had wristbands on, you know. And the electrical signal actually, it's a really cool evolutionary adaptation because it wasn't always this way, and our muscles would contract. We'd be very very slow creatures if this didn't happen this way. Instead of the electrical signal traveling through the nerve, it jumps from fatty sheath to fatty sheath outside the nerve. And with that's like ALS or MS, multiple sclerosis, that's what actually happens is those fatty sheaths go away, and that's where you lose that function. And then they get to the synapse, and that electrical signal here becomes a chemical signal. And those are the neurotransmitters, dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine, acetylcholine, serotonin, and then they release those chemical signals into the synaptic cleft. Now it leaves the nerve again, and it's in a space, and there's a second nerve here, and those soak up the chemical
If there's
signals.
enough
And so,
concentration
like
to
an
actually cause that
SSRI,
depolarization. If there's
what's
actually
that?
enough concentration of those neurotransmitters to create the
Yep,
depolarization, which there isn't always. So just because there's
yep,
a
yep,
signal doesn't necessarily mean.
yep.
I hope.
Yeah, and that's cool because that's how uh, like antidepressant
Mhm.
medications work. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. What they do is they selectively inhibit the reuptake of the serotonin. So serotonin goes into the synaptic cleft. There might not be enough, and it'll get sucked back in, get retaken back up by the previous nerve. Well, if you inhibit that, then they stay there longer. It's more likely that there's going to be enough to transmit to the next nerve. And it's really there's really like two things that like an interesting thing is how fast we are and how quickly everything happens on Earth is really dependent on two things: the electrical signals of nerves and then gravity. because when you run or when you take any kind of motion, how fast you take each step is dependent on how fast gravity is accelerating your foot back down. And so, if we were on a lighter planet, so if aliens ever came and they were from a very very heavy planet, they would be used to moving extremely fast. And you can picture the people on the moon bouncing around really slowly. And so if they were on a planet like the size of Jupiter and they came here, they would think that's how our movements would appear to them, because their whole process. And so they'd have to, if they had electrical signals, like nerves is a similar process, that would have to adapt as well and be some further adaptation to be a faster signal, which is kind of interesting to think about. Otherwise, they'd be stuck with the problem of having to deal with the gravity and having to react that fast to how fast their legs are moving or whatever with gravity, but they'd have to be able to create a muscle signal that kept up
I
with
love,
that. So just
I
total.
love that we just went on this tangent, because at some point I'm sure we're going to end up talking about pain science, and you just laid the foundation for me so I don't have to talk through it. It's awesome.
You're gonna have to repeat it.
Perfect.
Probably.
We could,
Where were we going with that?
have no idea.
What was the original question?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to remember.
Oh, electrolytes. Yeah. And so that's how it all, like, everything's electricity. I mean, that's why it's so important. And so those things get thrown off. Even though we haven't cut sodium or anything, you're still probably releasing sodium. You're peeing lower, because it all goes back to your blood has to maintain 0.9% sodium concentration. And if we lower the amount of water in your blood, so if there's 10 chunks of sodium in a bucket of water, and it has to be 10 chunks per gallon. If we go down to a half a gallon, now we can only have 5 chunks of sodium. So you have to flush that sodium out, even if we haven't cut sodium. Your body will naturally do it. And so you're still, like, dealing with that, and then you have the big influx of food with all the sodium and all the water, and it's hard for your body. Your body's pretty good at normalizing it when things aren't extremely exaggerated, but after a contest, they are extremely exaggerated. You're drinking a ton of fluid, you're eating a ton of food, a ton of high
How
sodium
long
food.
after a contest do you think it takes most people? This is actually probably a good thing for people to hear. How long do you think post-contest it takes most people's bodies to kind of level out if they follow your kind of rebound protocol, which is eat what you want for about 36 hours, 5 high days plus the cheat at the end of the day?
Most people, like it, and it's dependent, and that's actually kind of a a decent gauge of how easy it's going to be for you to be a competitor. Like, people who get in shape really quickly, people who can compete show after show, who lean out very easily, they'll sometimes within a week, and definitely within 10 days. Most people about 10 to 14 days, they start their ankles start losing some of the water. It's really about 2 weeks. But the, like, super genetic freaks will be back to baseline like 7 days after, 2 days after they stop doing the high carb day blitz, if they do a full 5 day. It's really
What?
remarkable. And then the people who are naturally big and have a hard time getting in shape, it can be like 3 weeks or more.
Hmm.
I feel like I'm finding.
I'm guessing Dave probably stays watery for a while.
Yeah, although it seems to have gotten
Is
better
that
every show. Um, and like, yeah, it's like within a week I'll have like the really bad kinkles,
Yeah.
but this time
mhm.
it went down from that really bad point within, I don't know, 3 or 4 days, and now five weeks removed, I'm kind of just at that baseline off season level of, like, my ankles aren't super sharp, they're a little bloated, but it's just kind of how they're going to be for probably
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
next year.
And then, but
Last year.
that's the worst part about
Go ahead.
that's the worst part about the rebound, is because you're in shape, and then very quickly you don't look in shape anymore. But at least you're really full, and then you lose some of that water, and then you get this sweet spot, which is, even, I think, even better than prep, when you're like super saturated with glycogen and you're so full. It's like you have the best pump of your life 24/7, and you look huge, and you've lost some of the excess water, so now you look decently lean again, at least in clothing. And there's like that Goldilocks zone from like maybe 2.5 weeks post show to about six
Yeah.
weeks post show, where you look like Mr. Olympia, and you think it's going to stay like that all off season, but then that extra fullness starts to subside, and by like 6 weeks after, 7 weeks after, it's like
Yeah,
just
well,
normal
actually,
off season again.
the,
Not super
the
lean, not
fullness
super full.
subsides, but then you're still in a surplus, and so even if you're not gaining too fast, some of the water basically gets replaced by fat. So
Yeah, yeah. It's like a slow transition from really full that looks awesome to the same size,
Yeah,
but just not as
and that,
awesome
and kind
looking.
of another slight tangent, but that's just I feel like that's just when you have to stick it out. And if you're really interested in being a competitor, you have to deal with being uncomfortable and being okay with not looking your sharpest. Because that's I remember I never intended upon like crash dieting or doing anything to avoid this, but I think I asked you a question at some point after the first show that maybe made it sound like I was wanting to go that route. Like I was like, oh no, I'm getting fat. I want to diet again. And you're like, you said something like, I can't recommend enough that you not diet right now. That will make the rest of your off season just horrible. And I was like, no, I don't want to. I don't want to.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but if you stick it out, the results are so great. Like I remember looking at last off season after prep number 2, after junior nats. It's like I got up to this bloated point. Like there were pictures. We were at Elite FTS when we met you there too. And I was pretty bloated there, and then
You were impressively bloated.
I was, yeah. Dave Tate was impressed with my bloat, which is really saying something because he's like the king of bloat.
Yeah,
Such
yeah.
a good moment.
Yeah. But then I remember, by the end of the off season, we took a vacation to Hawaii, and we had pics from that. I'm like, I'm not like lean by any means, but I'm like, okay, I'm 10 pounds heavier there than I was at Elite, and looking way better because it's like, yeah.
As a
Yeah,
female,
yeah.
it feels so unfair to watch his off season because like his rebound, like your rebounds have consistently been like 8 weeks. Mine are like 4, maybe 5.
Yeah, mine have just kind of lasted.
So he like
off-season.
takes his time getting back. He hits training hard, but that's like not a big deal if he misses it. Like if things aren't perfect for a week, I'm like I miss a week. That's 25% of my rebound.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Good point. Yeah.
Shoot, I had a question I was gonna ask you.
Well, if you are, while we did the Dave Tate bloat thing, uh, there's actually a pretty funny story about that I was hesitant to even do because I was worried he was going to get flash pulmonary edema and die. But I think the second time we dieted together, so he had not seen like all whoever it might have been Swiss, but he was like 285 and like powerlifter 285, like eating not especially muscular, just eating whatever, probably over 20% body fat, and he wanted to get in shape, and so we dieted him down. And this is the time he looked really really good, and a lot of the pictures of him lean up at Elite are from that prep, and he got down into the 230s. And I was trying to talk him into doing a show because he could have, like a state level show, he could have done well. He had like a torn calf, he had some, all those injuries, and so like some of the muscles, like his torn pec, didn't look great, but he was shredded. And so he saw like all the guys at something. I don't remember who the guys are. There's like a group of guys, like that who I can't remember who it was who he was talking about, but he saw them probably like Ken and Serrano, and like guys like that. He saw him somewhere, and he was 230, and then he was going to see him again 6 weeks later, and he wanted to, and so he had already rebounded, so he was back up to like 280, 285 or something, and he wanted to like surprise them the opposite. And so he wanted to know how bloated he could get. And I was like, well, if you want to be like done with it, I said, we could do like crazy. I really would worry because you're already up, 40 pounds, 50 pounds from during your rebound. I'd worry about like flash pulmonary edema. And so I think I like made him like email me like a thing that says, he's doing this on his own free will and he would do it even more unhealthily if I didn't help him. But so we got him bedwetting desmopressin, like a nasal spray that kids who wet the bed would take before bed to use vasopressin, antidiuretic hormone. Yeah. So we had him every morning, I think. This is so stupid. I probably shouldn't even say this. Please no one do this. This is Dave Tate. This is like Dave's made a career of doing things that people shouldn't do. Every morning we did like 1,600 milligrams of ibuprofen because the NSAIDs would slow down his kidney function. And then every night we had him do desmopressin, so he wouldn't pee at all through the night. So basically, he wasn't peeing. And we had him do like probably 2 or 3 gallons of water a day. And we did the ramen noodle protocol, which was, and Dave's the only one who can keep this up long term. Most people can do this for like a day. Dave did this for like 7 days, which was 2 packets of ramen noodle every 2 hours with the full seasoning. And then so just the water from that you're mixing in with that is a gallon a day. And that's probably 25 grams of sodium, 30 grams. I don't even know. I mean, there's so much sodium in those things. And you're doing 2 of those every 2 hours. And so, like 8 or 9. So he's doing like 16 packs of ramen noodle a day, basically. And then we did half strength Gatorade, which he was trying to get at least 2 gallons of that down. and we were doing this baking soda water combo. So you can't. You can't. If you drink water that's more than 9% sodium, your kidneys can't filter it. Like a cat can filter it higher. They have really efficient kidneys. We can't. If you drink water that's 10% sodium, your kidneys cannot process it, and that's why you die. Like if you try to drink seawater, seawater is over 9%. So we weren't having it go over 9%, but we were getting pretty close to it. And so, anyways, long story short, Dave sees these guys at 2:30, and it was, I don't even think it was 6 weeks. It was a very short period of time. And he saw those same guys again at
Oh my
320.
God.
So 90 pounds
That's a
in
human.
a little over a month. He
No,
couldn't walk. I mean, his lower back was so tight. He couldn't even, he had to sit down and make his ramen noodle because he couldn't stand at a counter with his arms in front of him. That was enough weight
God.
on it in front for his lower back. I think like a pregnant woman walks. He walked like that. I don't think he could tie his shoes. It was so bad, And I was like, I was really worried he was going to get flash pulmonary edema, but he didn't because Dave's got
Yeah.
like 9 lives
Almost.
per year. But but yeah. But yeah, no. So he came those same guys that just saw. I mean, like 6 weeks sounds like a long time, but if you think about it, like what is it? It's mid-August, And that's like if you saw someone, like the 4th of
Yeah.
July, and it's like, oh, he's shredded, and you see him now, like it feels like a couple weeks later. It is a couple
Oh
weeks
my
later, and he's
gosh.
100 pounds heavier, and just face so swollen that probably couldn't even blink because his eyes were already
Holy
swollen
cow.
shut.
One
Yeah.
other thing, people on the topic of whether or not to get on stage, the idea of like a 2 to 3 year off season. Like I had someone tell me, don't even bother getting on stage next year. Give yourselves 2 to 3 years to grow before you even think about getting on stage for WPD again. And I
Mhm.
kind of mentally gave the middle finger. But even just beyond that, I mean, do you think there's some value in dieting down kind of every year just to kind of resensitize to actually adding tissue and insulin and everything else?
Absolutely. And I've never seen someone take a long period of time off and
Mm-hmm.
come back dramatically improved. And you can even look, there's evidence out there. What happens? So even more frequent dieting, and it's the rebound that does it. But what happens? You look at bodybuilder to bodybuilder. What happens as an amateur? They work their way up, and then they get to where they're ready to turn pro, and they do like one show a year, right? And they don't really progress much. They might be, like I don't want to pick any names that took long, like Bob Ciccarillo, but he's kind of a bad one. But he did the same thing actually. Bob Ciccarillo competed for like 20 years. I think it was like 17 years trying to turn pro at roughly the same weight, 220ish, heavyweight, and then I think barely in the super heavies. But then you turn pro, and what happens? Now you do multiple shows a year, and so you get at least 2 rebounds a year, maybe even 3 if you're trying to, if you do some early shows, don't quite qualify for the Olympia, do an early late season show, qualify for the Olympia, have 6 weeks before you need to start your Olympia prep. You might get 3 rebounds in a year, and then guys blow up when they turn pro. I say guys, just like that's the sexist in me of being a guy. That's what's always in my head. But countless bodybuilders, like they compete and they grow, and then they're like at the almost ready to turn pro level, and they're the same size for year after year after year. They turn pro, and then boom, they shoot up. And it's because what happens after you do a show? What helps you grow? One, being able to eat in a surplus without getting too fat, and this is more male specific with this body fat thing I'm about to say, but because as a male, 8 to 12% body fat roughly is where you're most anabolic. You get above that point, you start aromatizing more of your testosterone and estrogen, and your insulin sensitivity plummets. And so after a show, you have the longest period of time where you can eat in an excessive calorie surplus without your body fat going above that 12% range, where your hormones are no longer the optimal and your insulin's maximally sensitized. So your rate of growth after a hard diet it's like logarithmic. You grow like crazy, and then it basically
Yeah.
asymptotic to zero. So if you don't do another show, do another diet, you don't have to do a show. If you don't resensitize things, you just kind of stay there. And you can look around the gym. When was the last time you saw a permabulker gain 20 pounds in a year? You see Dave gain 20 pounds of muscle every year. You see competitors gain 20 pounds of muscle. You don't see a permabulker. You see they're the same size year after year, and they don't want to diet down because they don't want to lose their size, and they don't want to do a show until they're big enough, and they never get there because they've lost all the things that maximize growth: low body fat, the ability to eat a calorie surplus without
Yeah.
going too high in body fat, optimal aromatization
Well, that's
levels, and
exactly
optimum
what I
insulin sensitivity.
told this
So,
guy, but he didn't really want to hear it.
Well, yeah,
I mean, like maybe it might take 2 years worth of time. It might take 24 months to get the size you need. But if you did
Right.
24 straight months without
Exactly.
any resensitization
so
and
when
stuff,
you
yeah.
have, I maybe Rivas is in the situation. I guess sometimes people will take that long just because I don't know their life gets in the way and they just can't compete or for whatever reason. But if you have someone who's a really serious competitor and they decide for whatever reason that they don't want to do a show for 2 years after the last one, do you still have them do a very hard diet in the middle there?
If they get too fat, yeah. And John's actually dieting right now a little bit.
Hmm.
He just did a guest posing, but yeah, if they, it's really, it's. I mean, I guess technically you may not have to do that, but if you're doing things right, you probably are because to grow rapidly, you really need to be in a calorie surplus. And that's kind of a misconception. You don't have to be in a surplus to build muscle. That's not. It's not like your body it takes into account everything. It says, well, it's a, well, to add new tissue does take excess calories, but you can be, if your hormones are correct, if your blood androgens are high, if your insulin sensitivity is high, if your estrogen's in a good area, you can you can locally be in a calorie surplus for a short period of time, an hour or two after workout, because we're not adding a ton of weight, when you're adding muscle. You're only adding a few grams a day. So you can be in a local surplus where there's a few extra grams of amino acids that are able to synthesize new muscle tissue, even though you're in a deficit for the day over a 24-hour period. So you can that's growing into a show. You can build muscle even in a calorie deficit if everything's optimal,
Hmm.
but it's not as efficient. So to maximize growth, you really need to be in a surplus. And if you're in a surplus long enough, some of that extra you're not going to nail it perfectly, like the exact number of calories to build muscle. There's going to be some
Right.
excess that's going to get turned to fat. And so you don't necessarily have to get too fat and diet, but if you did that, you probably weren't growing as fast as you could because you were holding
So
back calories a little
I'm
too
curious
much.
about how the math of this works out when you consider people with really different metabolisms and just different propensities for staying lean or getting fat. Because I mean, you will see guys who seem to really be able to push food in the off season and they just don't gain that much fat. So with these guys, like they're still eating the
Hmm.
food and the energy's going somewhere. So are they just gaining at a greater rate because their what is it, their P ratio is better, they're converting more of it to muscle, or is their metabolism just up regulating more in response, so they're basically burning hotter all the time?
Or is it like a glycogen utilization and
Yeah.
retention issue, or refilling rather?
It's a combo things. One of it that people don't like never think of is imperfect absorption of calories. Like by the end of a prep, you absorb every calorie you eat. So like if you ingest 2,000 calories a day, we just assume that that's how many calories get into the bloodstream. But that's not always true. Like at the end of a prep, yeah, you're
Mhm.
extracting every nutrient. But at the end of like when someone's really pounding food, like when they're doing 1,000 grams of carbs many days a week and eating, 5,000 calories, there's just so much food. Not all of that is crossing the small intestine. Some of it is going all the way down to the large intestine and out into the toilet. And probably some of it all the time, even when you're in prep, but you just get way more efficient at extracting nutrients. It's almost like a survival mechanism. So that plays a role. There's the metabolic adaptation, which isn't huge, but it is there. You upgrade your thyroid production. When you're hot, like in the off season, after a high day when you're running hot, you sweat all the time. So that's an
Yeah.
upregulation of metabolism. Yeah, I know you guys were because now I understand with my wife. I sympathize with my wife more when I came back from Tampa, because that's what I used to have to do, have the
Nice.
house like as cold as it would go. Well,
They-
now I'm like a normal person. Yeah, and now I'm a normal person with a normal metabolism, so the temp can be 70 degrees,
I have our
72 degrees, and
thermostat
I'll
yeah,
tolerate
well,
it.
our
Where before,
thermostat
if
is
it
at
was over
58 degrees
65,
right now.
56 actually.
I turned it up a bit.
Oh,
Um,
God.
it-
so yeah, but now I know I feel bad because my wife complained for years, and I was like, "You're
the
crazy! It's hot in here." When
the
it was
the
like
absorption
62.
thing's funny. I remember this is probably like a year or two ago now, and Mike Israetel of Renaissance Periodization did a video kind of about this, and it was in response to some fad because at that time there was some trend or fad going around in the weight loss industry talking about how like this or that supplement would help you like absorb your food better and improve nutrient absorption.
Oh,
And I think
yeah.
if you think
I
about it
was.
logically, you're like, hang on, isn't that the opposite of what we want? And he's like, guys, obese people are the fucking best at
Yeah,
utilizing nutrients. They don't need better nutrient absorption.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And that's probably, I mean, that's the first thing. Like, what happens to someone with like a malabsorption disorder? That's the
Oh,
first thing. That's one of the
weight
first
loss.
indicators
Yeah,
is
yeah,
they're thin, rail thin. But you say that that's funny. That's like the HCG
Yeah.
diet.
yeah.
Have you seen those? The HCG diet. So you take HCG, and for 6 weeks you eat 500 calories a day. It just cracks me up. You eat 500 calories a day. With or without the
Hmm.
HCG, you're gonna drop some weight. But it cracks me up. Because if you Google HCG, the
Yeah.
first things that come up is HCG diet, and it's like, and you see all these people saying, "Oh, it worked amazing for me. I took my HCG. I ate 500
Dropped all
calories
the
a day for
weight.
6 weeks.
I want to go. I want to go leave.
The HCG
I
didn't
want
do
to go
it.
like leave
Yeah,
a
if
review on
any,
those websites. Be like, man, I don't know. I took HCG and all I got was pregnant.
yeah, yeah. I'll be like, this HCG diet works so amazing. I didn't even take the HCG. I just ate 500 calories a day, and I
I
lost
wanted to chat
weight.
real quick about high days too,
Do you
because
want to?